Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're going deep on UFOs and government narratives and really just critical thinking in general. You
Mhm.
sent over this video and it dives into the theory that all this recent UFO talk could be a calculated psychological operation, a PSYOP. And honestly, some of the points it raises are pretty intriguing.
Yeah. What really stood out to me was this idea of recognizing patterns, how information is presented, especially from like official sources. It connects current events like these UFO disclosures to, historical instances of government manipulation. So it's not just about UFOs, right? It's about understanding how these narratives are built and how they could be used to influence us.
Okay, yeah, I'm with you. The guy who made the video, he claims to have a background in training people on PSYOPs,
Hmm.
and he points to this recent shift in how the government's talking about UFOs. Like, for years, it was all hush-hush and denial. Now we have these congressional hearings, these leaked videos, officials just casually dropping terms like UAP, unidentified aerial phenomena. So what's going on with this sudden transparency?
Well, the source argues that this shift could be strategic, a way to like prep the public for something bigger. It makes you think, right, why now? What's changed that's making governments around the world more open about UFOs all of a sudden? The source suggests this could be a way to distract from other issues, maybe create a sense of unity against some external threat, or even just to like test the waters and see how far they can push a narrative.
Hold on a second. That's a pretty big claim. Is this guy saying the government's straight up lying about aliens?
Not necessarily. I mean, the source is careful not to make like definitive statements about whether aliens exist or not.
Yeah.
It's more about the potential for this narrative, regardless of its truth, to be used as a tool for manipulation.
Okay, so how does he back up this theory?
Well, he brings up a bunch of historical parallels, which honestly really got me thinking. One example he gives is the Gulf of Tonkin incident back in the 60s, where these reports about attacks on U.S. ships, they were used to justify escalating the Vietnam War. Later, it came out that the incident was, misrepresented, possibly to sway public opinion.
Man, that's disturbing. It definitely shows how information can be twisted, especially when things are tense. Are there other historical examples that kind of fit this pattern?
Yeah, for sure. The source also talks about Operation Northwoods. It was a plan, declassified now, from the early 60s, where U.S. officials considered staging fake attacks on U.S. soil to justify action against Cuba. Crazy, right? I mean, the plan was rejected by Kennedy, but it shows that this idea of using, fake events to manipulate the public, it's been on the table before.
Whoa, that's chilling. Makes you wonder what other plans might be out there that we don't know about. So, how does this connect to the UFO stuff we're talking about today?
Well, the source argues there are some, striking similarities in how these narratives are built and spread. They point to the use of fear, the reliance on vague or unverified info, and this kind of us versus them narrative that really discourages critical thinking. The source suggests that if you replace like communism or terrorism with UFOs, you start to see a similar pattern emerging.
Hmm. Yeah, I see what you mean. It's like a formula, right? Like manufacturing consent, using fear and uncertainty to get people to go along with policies or actions that they might normally push back on. Okay, so let's get back to the UFOs. What does he say about how this narrative might be playing out right now?
Well, he lays out this like hypothetical step-by-step plan. The first stage he calls the normalization phase. It's where the government slowly introduces the idea of aliens and UFOs into the mainstream. So, lead videos, official statements, carefully chosen words, all of that contributes to making this topic seem less, fringe and more credible.
So like they're priming us, getting us used to the idea before they hit us with the big reveal.
Exactly. The source says after this normalization phase, we might see something more dramatic, like a big reveal, something that grabs everyone's attention, something impossible to ignore, like a major UFO sighting over a city or some crazy footage of alien tech. He even suggests that they might use advanced tech to pull this off, like holograms, drones, deepfakes, stuff like that.
Whoa, this is getting into some serious sci-fi territory.
Yeah.
So what happens after this big reveal? What's the end game, according to the source?
Well, this is where it gets even more interesting. He suggests that after the initial shock, the chaos of this big reveal, governments are going to step in as the saviors, offering solutions to this, like perceived threat from aliens. And these solutions could be anything from increased military spending and global surveillance to like forming international coalitions and maybe even, limiting some civil liberties for the sake of security.
Okay, so I think I'm seeing the bigger picture here. He's suggesting that this whole UFO thing, whether aliens are real or not, could be used to justify a power grab, using fear and uncertainty to, grab more control and limit our freedom. That's pretty heavy stuff.
It is. And the source actually offers some tools to help us, analyze information and spot manipulation. He calls it the ESCO-OP formula for spotting a psychological operation. It's basically a checklist that encourages us to really think critically about the source of information, when it was released, the emotional triggers it uses, and the evidence it provides.
Wait, the ESCO-RP formula, that sounds interesting. Let's break that down. What are some red flags we should be looking for, especially when it comes to something as, wild as UFOs?
Sure. He emphasizes looking at the source of the information. Is it a news outlet that's known for fact-checking and good journalism? Or is it some random website or social media account that's known for, sensationalism or pushing a specific agenda?
Right. Consider the source.
Yeah.
Got it. What else?
He also says it's important to question the timing. Like, why is this coming out now? Is there a connection to other stuff going on in the world, like political scandals or economic crises or, even international conflicts? Could this be a distraction, a way to shift our attention?
Good point. Always got to consider the context.
Right.
And any hidden motives. What about the emotional side of things? How can we avoid getting caught up in the hype or the fear, especially with something like UFOs?
Yeah, the source warns us about those emotional triggers. PSYOPs often use fear, anger, or even like a sense of awe and wonder to bypass our critical thinking. So ask yourself, is this designed to make me feel a certain way? Is it playing on my fears or biases?
So stay calm, don't panic, and think critically, even when everyone's freaking out about aliens. Makes sense. But what about the evidence? How do we know what to believe, especially with something as crazy as alien contact?
That's where the E in the ESCO formula comes in, evidence. The source says we need to really scrutinize the evidence that's being presented, especially for extraordinary claims. Is it based on verifiable facts, scientific data, credible eyewitnesses, or is it just rumors, anonymous sources, or like blurry footage that could easily be fake?
This ESCO checklist, it seems like a really useful tool, not just for UFOs, but for anything that could be manipulated or, full of misinformation.
It's all about becoming a more discerning consumer of information. Now, even if we entertain the possibility of alien life, the source brings up some interesting questions about the timing and the source of all these recent UFO disclosures. Why is this happening now? And why are we getting this info through governments, which, as we've talked about, have a history of, twisting the narrative?
Right. Wouldn't an advanced alien civilization be able to communicate directly with us? Why go through the government?
Yeah, this whole thing is starting to seem a little suspicious, even if you believe in aliens. Exactly. That's the main point the source is trying to make. It's not about debunking UFOs or saying aliens don't exist. It's about encouraging us to be critical thinkers, to question the narratives we're being fed, and to be aware of the potential for manipulation.
This deep dive is already so fascinating. We're just getting started. You mentioned that the source gives specific examples of language and tactics that point to a PSYOP. Can we dive into that a bit more?
Absolutely. He highlights some specific phrases and tactics that are common in PSYOPs. They're designed to evoke fear, shut down critical thinking, and basically steer public opinion in a certain direction. Recognizing these patterns can help us become, more aware and less likely to be manipulated.
This is getting really interesting. I have a feeling this is going to be a real eye-opener.
I think so, too. So yeah, those phrases, unprecedented threat, undeniable evidence, the source points those out as, classic PSYOP language.
Yeah. Unprecedented threat definitely sounds like, something out of a movie trailer, like trying to make it sound really urgent, really scary, so people will just accept whatever solutions are being offered, no questions asked.
Right. And undeniable evidence, that one suggests there's no room for debate or different interpretations. It's like they're presenting it as absolute truth, shutting down any critical thinking.
It's like saying, just trust us, don't even think about it. But shouldn't we always be questioning information? Especially when it's coming from, people in power.
Absolutely. The source is all about encouraging healthy skepticism. Especially these days, always ask yourself, who benefits from this information? What are their motives? And what evidence is there to back it up?
Okay, so besides those catchphrases, what other tactics do PSYOPs use to, mess with our perception?
Well, they talk about using emotionally charged images and storytelling. Think about those grainy UFO videos that you see online all the time. They're often blurry. You can't really tell what you're looking at. But they still create this sense of, awe and wonder or even fear and anxiety, right? And those emotions can make people more likely to buy into the narrative, even if the evidence is, pretty weak.
Yeah, it's like those scary stories we used to tell each other at sleepovers. Even if we knew they weren't real, they still freaked us out.
Exactly. PSYOPs tap into those primal emotions. They bypass our rational minds and go straight for those gut reactions.
And this is all starting to sound a little like Orwellian. Is this source saying we're living in a dystopia where we can't trust anything we see or hear?
Not necessarily. It's more about, like, empowering us to be critical thinkers, not giving into paranoia. He gives some practical tips for how to navigate this crazy information landscape.
Okay, so what can we do? How do we protect ourselves from being manipulated? Do we all need to become like UFO experts or conspiracy theorists?
No, not at all. The most important tool, according to the source, is our own critical thinking skills. We need to learn how to evaluate information, question assumptions, identify biases, both in ourselves and in the sources we're looking at.
That makes sense. But how do we actually develop those skills? It's not like they teach us that stuff in school.
Well, the source suggests a few things. One is to diversify our sources of information. Don't just rely on one news outlet or one social media platform. Look for different perspectives, even ones that you might disagree with.
Yeah, it's easy to get trapped in those echo chambers where you're only exposed to information that confirms what you already believe.
Exactly. Challenging our own beliefs by engaging with different viewpoints, that helps us sharpen our critical thinking and avoid confirmation bias.
So diversify our sources, challenge our beliefs. Okay. What else?
The source also talks about the importance of fact-checking and verifying information. Don't just blindly accept everything you read or hear, especially online. Take the time to research, look for credible sources, cross-check information across different platforms, that kind of thing.
Right. Don't just share that crazy headline on social media without doing a little digging first. It's like that saying, trust but verify.
Exactly. And finally, the source encourages us to be mindful of our own emotional responses. If you feel yourself getting overwhelmed with fear or anger or even excitement, take a step back. Ask yourself, why am I feeling this way? Is this information being presented in a way that's, designed to manipulate me?
Be aware of our emotional reactions, fact-check everything, and diversify our sources. Those seem like good rules for navigating the world today, whether we're talking about UFOs, politics, or, anything really.
Absolutely. It's about empowering ourselves to be informed and engaged, to think critically, and to make decisions based on reason and evidence, not fear and manipulation.
Well said. This discussion has been really eye-opening. You mentioned earlier that the source connects this potential UFO PSYOP to, a power grab by governments.
Mm-hmm.
Can we explore that a little more? What are some specific ways this narrative could be used to justify more control and surveillance?
That's a good question. The source argues that the fear and uncertainty around a potential alien threat, it could be used to justify policies that, erode our civil liberties and concentrate power in the hands of a few.
This is getting pretty serious. Let's unpack those ideas and see how they connect to, critical thinking, media literacy, and individual freedom in this digital age. So this idea that the UFO narrative, even if it's a PSYOP, could be used to justify more control, more surveillance. It's a pretty heavy concept.
It is, and the source kind of points out that this isn't exactly a new thing. Throughout history, governments have used these perceived threats, whether they're real or imagined, to justify expanding their power and, limiting individual freedoms.
So are you saying this potential UFO PSYOP can just be like another version of that? Like the war on terror all over again, but with aliens instead of terrorists?
The source does draw some interesting parallels there. Think about the Patriot Act, passed after 9/11. It really expanded the government's surveillance powers, all in the name of national security. And the source argues that a similar playbook could be used with, this perceived threat from aliens.
So under the guise of protecting us from aliens, governments could justify things like, I don't know, more monitoring of our online activity, expanding facial recognition, maybe even limiting our freedom to travel or gather in groups.
Yeah, those are some of the concerns the source raises. They argue that when there's a climate of fear and uncertainty, people are more willing to accept measures that, under normal circumstances, they might see as intrusive or even authoritarian.
It's a slippery slope, right? We give up a little freedom for security and a little more. And before you know it, we're living in a society where our every move is being tracked.
That's the danger they highlight. And it's not just about government surveillance either. The source also points to how this narrative could be used to justify, increased military spending, new weapon systems, even preemptive military action against these perceived threats. all to defend humanity from an alien invasion, of course.
This is all starting to sound really, well, bleak. Does he offer any solutions? Is there anything we can do to stop this kind of dystopian future from happening?
The source really stresses that awareness is the first step. By understanding how manipulation works, recognizing these historical patterns, and really developing our critical thinking skills, we can be more discerning about the information we consume and less susceptible to these fear-based narratives.
So knowledge is power, right? But what about action? What could we do to resist this potential power grab, even if it's presented as being for our own good?
The source encourages us to engage in constructive dialogue, to question the motives of those in power, and to hold them accountable. We need to be really vigilant about defending our civil liberties and be wary of any solutions that involve sacrificing freedom for security.
That makes sense. It's about being informed, engaged citizens who are willing to speak up and challenge authority. It's also about supporting organizations that are working to protect our freedoms and promote transparency and accountability.
Absolutely. And it's about recognizing that we're not powerless. By working together, staying informed, and speaking out, we can shape the future and make sure it's one where individual freedom and critical thinking, really prevail.
This has been a really thought-provoking deep dive. We've covered a lot, from the history of government manipulation to the potential dangers of this whole UFO narrative. It's clear that critical thinking and media literacy are more important now than ever.
Couldn't agree more. And I think it's important to remember that even if we don't buy into every single point made in the source material, it's still valuable to, engage with these ideas and have these conversations. It helped us sharpen our critical thinking skills and be more aware of all the complex forces that are shaping our world.
Well said. This episode has definitely given me a lot to think about. And for our listeners who are equally passionate about, critical thinking and exploring diverse perspectives, we wanted to take a moment to mention our GoFundMe campaign for our podcast, Standing in the Gaps.
We're working hard to create thought-provoking content that encourages listeners to, question assumptions and really dive deep into these important issues. And with your support, we can keep growing and reach an even wider audience.
We're hoping to upgrade our equipment. Things like webcams, studio mics, better computers for editing, all that stuff to improve the quality of our productions and make our deep dives, even more engaging and insightful.
We believe that everyone deserves access to, quality information and diverse perspectives, and your contributions, no matter how big or small, can really help us make that happen.
We'll put a link to our GoFundMe in the show notes for anyone who's interested in supporting our work. And as always, thank you for joining us on the Deep Dive. We'll catch you next time for another, thought-provoking exploration of the ideas shaping our world.